Hello everyone, and welcome to Part 2 of CSS Level 1. In Part 2, we're going to begin to discuss backgrounds and borders. We will also show you how to utilize the div and span tags that we mentioned during the HTML sections of the course, but weren't actually able to really use. Let's get started by jumping to the editor and our CSS files. Alright, so here I have my browser open as well as my editor. I have an HTML file, I've called it part2.html, and I've used this link with the style sheet to reference another CSS file called part2_master.css. And you can really name these whatever you want, just make sure that your link is correct. To get started, let's create a little bit of content in this HTML file. I'm going to say, this is a paragraph, and we'll also mention it's outside any divs. So outside any div container. And then I'm actually going to create a div. And a div allows us to essentially create a container. And you'll notice that as I autocomplete this, I get this class pop up. Don't worry about that for now. We're going to learn about class in a future lecture in CSS. For now, just leave it as the basic div opening and closing tags. And I'm going to make 3 paragraph tags inside of this. First one will say, I'm inside the div. Second one will say, I'm also inside the div. And then the third one is going to say this, inside div, and then we'll use the span tag that we've learned about, and then we'll say inside span. And save that. Let's refresh, make sure everything's working. And we see here, this is a paragraph outside any div. I'm inside the div, inside the div, inside div, and then inside span in all caps. Perfect. So now we have all the content. It's time to play with our CSS file to see how we can affect that content. And I'm a little zoomed in here, so yours probably won't be as large in your browser as mine is, but this is just so you can view it. First thing I want to discuss is affecting the entire body of the HTML. So you'll notice all our HTML content is inside these 2 body tags. Everything else is just metadata. So all the actual HTML content is within these 2 body tags, which means if I want to affect everything, essentially, in that HTML, I can call the body tag. So that's my selected tag, and then I can affect the property. For instance, one property I can affect is the background. And you'll notice that Atom Text Editor will try to help you out with a bunch of prompts here, background color, background position, repeat, etc. Let's keep it basic and just do the background color. And I will just type in a color here. Let's type in gray as our background color. Going to save this and refresh this page, and now I notice that the entire background for everything in the body, which is essentially all the HTML content, is gray. Perfect. Now, let's explore the div. And remember, the div allows us to essentially make these containers. So div, I'll specify the background color for the div to be something like blue. Semicolon, save it, and refresh here. And now, everything that was inside the div, these 3 lines, including that inside span, are now have a background of blue. And something to also note here, for colors, for very basic colors, it doesn't matter whether you say background-color or if you just say background. Either one of these will work. So if I save this and change this to, let's say, something like red, which is going to be really bright and annoying, so I wouldn't suggest that you do that, but there it is. I'm inside div, also inside div, etc. Background essentially works the same way as background color when it comes to just very basic coloring. Now let's explore how to do borders. So borders are going to require 3 elements to it. Basically the border color, the border width, and then the border style. So for instance, if I make a border for the div, and I say the border, let's say the border color is going to be blue. So the border color is blue. If I click refresh here, I'm not going to see anything. And that's because I haven't defined the border width and the border style. So I need to define those 2 first. Otherwise, CSS doesn't really know how thick of a border I want be around this div. So we'll say border width. And notice that we can actually specify left, right, top, image, bottom, etc. We're going to keep things basic for now and just specify the border width. And if I hit enter, Atom Text Editor, always here to help, also says you want a thin border, a medium border, or a thick border. So we'll say thick for now. And then we'll also say border style. And the border style we'll do is something like let's just say dotted. So let's save this, refresh, And now you can see I have a dotted blue border around this div. Now you may be also wondering, well, what's the difference between thick and thin? So if I replace this with thin, save that and refresh, then I see, if you can't really see here, but if you do this on your own computer, you'll see extremely thin pixels here of the border. Usually, however, you don't want thin or thick, you want to specify your own thickness. And you can do that by specifying the pixels. So I can say something like 10 px, and that will tell me that I want the border width to be 10 pixels. So if I refresh this, then I can see 10 pixels here. And later on, we'll also see how to specify pixel widths in relevance or in relationship to other elements. So you don't have to have an absolute pixel. So now let's make this super thick. So I'll make this 100, refresh this, and I can see I have a really super thick, so only 4 were able to show up. Let's make this much thinner, something like 5. Save this, refresh, and here we have at 5 pixels. We can do 2 pixels, save and refresh, and you get the idea. All right, so that was background, background color, and then the 3 elements you need for border: the style, the width, and the color. And it's a lot of fun to play around with the styles, especially since the Atom text editor is really going to help you choose styles. So you can also do things such as a double, refresh. You can see this kind of double border. Almost looks like a painting. Okay, so that was how we can affect things inside the div. Now, let's show you how we can affect text color. So if I say something like paragraph, call the color, and make everything inside of this something like green, then that will affect all the paragraphs, regardless of where they are. Let me make this into a clearer color. Let's say something like yellow, and let's make this background blue, and make this border color orange. That way things are hopefully more clear for you to see. All right, so what I've done here is I've changed the colors of the div background and border, but I also said all paragraph elements have the color yellow. And notice that when I say all paragraph elements, it doesn't matter whether they're inside the div or outside the div. When I call something like this, it specifically requests all paragraph elements regardless of where they are. Later on, we'll show you how to select elements that are inside of divs and also a specific element type. So maybe you only want to affect headings inside of a div or heading 4s inside of a specific div. Then lastly, I want to show you the span tag. And the span allows us to grab anything within that span. So remember, it was these 2 words, inside span. So I will call background here and say something like red. And let's give it a color of black. So now if I save this and refresh over here, I can see inside span is now background red, color black. All right, so what have we learned so far? We've learned the body, div, p, and span tags. Hopefully now you realize that you can basically call any HTML tag and start affecting its properties. The properties we learned about so far are the background, border, and color properties. Lastly, I want to show you another case of background where you can actually set the background to be an image. So let me grab an image. You can do this just by going to Google Images and then looking up whatever image you want. So let's say I want a picture of a beach. I can look up this. I click here on this image, then I click View Image, and it takes me to this link right here. So let me copy that full path. And for background, I'm going to say not gray, but I will actually call a special keyword URL and pass in that entire URL. So that's linking the background to this image. So now I will save this, and back under CSS Basics, I will refresh, and we can see here we get the, if I expand this, we get that whole beach image as the background for the body. If we want it, we don't need to have it zoomed in like this. We can specify various properties of this background image. Things, for instance, such as background repeat or background no repeat, etc. So we can actually specify how many times we want it to repeat. In our case, the background image is so large that it's not going to make much of a difference because I'm zoomed in. But if I zoom out here, we can begin to see that I have this background image. I'm zoomed out right now, and I see that entire beach. So if I want the background to repeat multiple times, then under repeat, background repeat, I can say repeat. Save that, refresh this page, and I can see now the background is being repeated. All right, so far we have these kind of funky, really 90s looking HTML sites. Later on, we're going to see how we can make these into much nicer, but right now the point is to really understand how CSS works. Okay, if you have any questions, feel free to post them to the Q&A forums. I'll see you at the next lecture.